I used to think silence in the woods meant safety, until the night something pressed its face against my tent wall and breathed slow, heavy, like it was smelling me through the fabric. When I finally looked, there were 2 imprints of hands dragging slowly down the outside. Tonight, you'll hear what happens when the forest decides you're not alone. Welcome back, little ravens. I'm Morrigan, and tonight we're stepping far away from highways, towns, and anything that feels familiar into the forests where campers, hikers, and night explorers have experienced some of the most terrifying encounters ever reported. These stories aren't about ghosts in old houses or creatures in abandoned buildings. They're about what happens when the night grows quiet, when the fire burns low, and something begins moving in the dark where no human should be. You'll hear true camping horror stories, told in first person by people who are isolated, unarmed, and miles from help. Encounters with silent watchers, vanishing structures, and figures that move through the trees without making a sound. So zip up your tent, keep the flashlight close, and whatever you do, don't ignore the noises outside. Let's begin. I went camping last September to clear my head after a rough stretch at work. I chose a small, primitive camping area in northern Minnesota, only 5 designated sites, no ranger station, and the nearest town 12 miles away. Perfect, I thought. A quiet weekend. No noise, no obligations, no pressure. I parked my car just before dusk and carried my gear down the short trail to my assigned site. It sat beside a narrow lake, with tall pines packed so densely around it that the wind barely reached the ground. I set up my tent, cooked a simple meal, and sat by the water until the sun disappeared behind the tree line. It was one of those nights where sound carries strangely. Every little ripple in the lake echoed like someone dropping stones. The woods themselves were unusually quiet, no bugs, no owls, just stillness. I should have taken that as a sign. Around 11 p.m., I crawled into my tent and zipped myself in. I fell asleep surprisingly fast. At some point during the night, something woke me. Not a noise, at least not one I remembered clearly. It was more like the sense of something. A pressure. A presence. I opened my eyes to pitch darkness. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Not an animal rooting around outside. This was slow, heavy, steady, like someone trying to control their breath but failing. It was so close I felt it through the nylon wall of the tent. I lay completely still, staring upward, barely daring to breathe myself. The breathing grew louder, closer. Then the fabric of the tent shifted inward, as if someone placed their face directly against it. I could see the slight deformation in the shape. The silhouette wasn't clear, but it was definitely human-sized. I whispered, "Hello?" I don't know why. Instinct, stupidity, fear pick one. The breathing stopped instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I reached slowly toward my backpack for the flashlight. Before I touched it, something dragged its hands down the outside of the tent. 2 long streaks from top to bottom. Slow, deliberate, almost testing the material. No animal does that. No animal has hands. I felt my throat close up. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. For maybe 20 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps. Bare footsteps. Soft but unmistakably human. They circled the tent once, twice, a third time. Each pass tighter than the last. I gripped the flashlight and finally snapped it on. The footsteps stopped. I shouted that I was armed. It was a lie, but I hoped it sounded convincing. Still nothing. Then I heard the sound that made my stomach drop a long inhale, like whoever was outside was smelling the air. Or smelling me. I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the tent in one motion, shined the light into the darkness, and stepped out with my heart slamming against my ribs. No one was there. The woods were silent again, not peaceful, empty. I scanned in a full circle, desperate for movement, for footprints, for anything that made sense. But there was nothing, no leaves rustling, no branches snapping, no sign that anyone had been near my campsite at all, until I turned back toward my tent. 2 long streaks of condensation ran down the front panel, exactly where the hands had been. Human-shaped streaks, fresh, still evaporating in the cold air. I packed everything in under 5 minutes. I didn't care about noise or order. I just needed to leave. I jogged the trail back to my car, shining my light ahead like a weapon. When I reached the parking area, I did see something. On the far side of the lot, between 2 trees, a figure stood completely still. Too still, watching me. I didn't wait to see if it moved. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and floored it out of there. I don't know if it followed me. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once, and I've never camped alone again. Whoever or whatever was outside that tent wasn't curious wildlife. It moved with intention. It touched the tent with hands. It breathed like a person, and the condensation trails prove it wasn't a hallucination. But the real question is this: why didn't it run when the light came on? Why didn't it speak? Why did it just stand there? Predators, human or not, often study their prey before acting. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't an attack. It's knowing someone stood inches away while you slept and chose not to stop you when you ran. Last July, my girlfriend and I took a weekend trip to a lakeside campground in eastern Washington. It wasn't deep wilderness, but it was isolated enough that the nearest ranger station was 2 hours away. We picked the spot because it had a reputation for being quiet, no RVs, no loud groups, no generators humming through the night. We arrived around noon, set up the tent near the shoreline, and spent most of the day swimming and reading. It felt like the perfect reset. As the sun began to set, we built a fire, cooked dinner, and opened a couple of beers. Everything felt peaceful, too peaceful, in retrospect. It started with small things. A branch cracking somewhere behind us, even though there was no wind. The feeling of being watched. I brushed it off as wildlife. We were in a forest, after all, but my girlfriend mentioned it too. By the time we put out the fire and climbed into the tent, the forest had gone dead silent. Not quiet silent. No bugs, no frogs, nothing. I told myself it was just the temperature drop. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a faint light flickering through the tent wall. It wasn't a flashlight beam. It was warmer, softer, like a lantern flame. At first, I thought another camper had wandered through our area. But the campground had only 4 sites, and we had seen only one occupied when we arrived, far across the lake. The light bobbed once, then steadied. I lay there, frozen, listening. I realized something was wrong when I heard no footsteps at all. Lantern light moves, but whoever was holding it wasn't. I unzipped the tent quietly and poked my head out. The light was maybe 40 feet away, hovering between the trees. It wasn't bright enough to reveal a figure directly, but the outline of someone holding it was unmistakable. A shoulder, a head, the faint curve of an arm. They were facing us. For a moment, I thought it might be the ranger doing a night check, but that didn't make sense. This place barely had staff. I whispered my girlfriend's name and motioned her to stay still. She saw the light too and immediately clutched my arm. That's when the light moved. Not toward us, around us. Slow, controlled. The lantern traced a circle around our campsite, weaving between the trees with impossible ease. There was no crackling leaves, no breaking twigs, no sound. Just that pale glow drifting, stopping every so often as if the person holding it was adjusting their stance. When the lantern reached the back of our campsite, it suddenly went out. Total blackness swallowed the woods. We waited 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. I couldn't hear breathing, footsteps, clothing, nothing. The silence felt like pressure against my ears. Suddenly, Something metallic clinked near the fire pit. My girlfriend gasped quietly. I grabbed my flashlight, turned it on, and shined it toward the sound. The beam landed on something small, hanging from a low branch above the extinguished fire. A small brass bell. It hadn't been there earlier. I scanned the trees. Nothing but darkness. Still, the sense of being watched was overwhelming. It felt like someone was standing just beyond the edge of the light, waiting for the being to move so they could step closer. "We're leaving," I whispered. We packed in the dark, hands shaking, every sound amplified. At one point, I thought I heard breathing behind me. Not close, just far enough away that I couldn't pinpoint direction. My girlfriend swore she saw movement between the trees, but every time I turned the flashlight, there was nothing. As we reached the car, she froze and pointed toward the lake. The lantern was back sitting on the shoreline, flame flickering gently. But this time, no figure held it. It was just there, lit, waiting. We got into the car, slammed the doors, and peeled out of the lot so fast gravel hit the undercarriage. The road back to the highway was narrow, twisting. Branches scraped the sides of the car like fingers. When we finally made it to a gas station 20 miles away, I checked the back seat twice before relaxing even a little. The brass bell? We found it inside the tent bag the next day. We never went back to that lake. A silent forest is never a good sign. Nature only goes quiet when something is wrong, when a predator is near. But in this case, it wasn't an animal. The lantern circling the campsite is classic stalking behavior. Slow, patient, deliberate. Whoever was out there wasn't lost or curious. They were studying the couple, testing boundaries, observing reactions. And the brass bell, that wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder, a message that whoever walked the woods that night wanted them to know one thing. Leaving doesn't mean you were allowed to escape. It only means you weren't chosen yet. I've spent most of my adult life camping alone. Not because I'm antisocial, but because the woods are one of the few places where my brain slows down enough to breathe. I live in Minnesota, and last September I decided to spend a long weekend in a remote section of Chippewa National Forest. It wasn't a marked campground, just a patch of flat ground near an old fire road. I hiked in about 3 miles with my pack, found a clearing surrounded by birch trees, and set up camp. I'd been there maybe an hour when I noticed something odd. The forest felt wrong. No wind, no insects, no birds. It was the middle of the afternoon, but there was this heaviness to the air, like the woods were holding their breath. I told myself it was just the isolation. By nightfall, fog rolled in so thick I couldn't see more than 15 feet. The only sound was the occasional drip of condensation falling from the branches. I cooked dinner, read by the fire, and eventually turned in around 11 p.m. I woke up sometime after 2 a.m. The fog was still there, but something had changed. There were footsteps outside my tent. Slow, dragging, then stopping, then moving again. I froze. I always keep a knife next to my sleeping bag habit more than fear, but that night my hand went straight to it. The footsteps circled, crunching lightly over dead leaves. Whoever it was seemed unsure of their path, pausing every few seconds. I whispered, "Hello? Who's there?" The footsteps stopped immediately. Then something tapped the tent wall right next to my head, not lightly, deliberately. I jerked away from the fabric, heart pounding. Whoever was out there wasn't an animal. No animal taps like that. After maybe 10 seconds of silence, the crunching resumed, but this time it drifted away into the fog. I waited a few minutes before unzipping the tent, just enough to peek out with my flashlight. The beam hit nothing but white mist. I stepped out slowly. The ground around my tent was covered in footprints, but not normal ones. They were barefoot, long, narrow, almost human, but the arch seemed too high, and the toes were spaced strangely far apart. Some of the prints were filled with water from the fog condensation, meaning they'd been there a while. I followed the trail for several yards until it veered off into the trees. That's when I saw it. The clearing wasn't empty anymore. On the far side, barely visible through the fog, was a figure standing between two birch trees. Tall, thin, motionless, facing me. I lifted the flashlight, but the mist swallowed the beam before it could reach their face. All I could make out was the silhouette of long neck, narrow shoulders, arms hanging unnaturally low. I said, "Hey, are you okay?" The figure didn't move, not an inch. I took a step back. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to return to the tent. As I turned, I heard fast movement, and spun around expecting the figure to be rushing me. But it was still standing in the exact same spot. The sound had come from my left, something running, branches snapping, leaves scattering. More footsteps do sets now, one heavy, one light circling me from opposite sides. I bolted back to my tent, zipped it shut, and grabbed my pack. I didn't even bother breaking the tent down. I have never packed faster in my life. My plan was simple: get to the fire road and hike out using my headlamp. As I started down the trail, the fog seemed to follow me. Every few seconds, I'd see movement just at the edge of my light shapes, shifting behind trees, quick bursts of motion, always stopping when I looked directly at them. But the worst moment happened when I reached the fire road. Standing right in the center of the path, maybe 30 yards ahead, was the same tall silhouette. No lantern, no reflection, no features. Just a human-shaped outline carved into the fog. I lifted my light again. The beam hit it this time, but instead of illuminating a face or clothing, it just stayed black. Like the figure was absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. I stepped backward, and the figure stepped forward. One slow, dragging step. That's all I needed. I turned and ran. Hard. Branches tore at my arms. Rocks slid under my boots, but I didn't care. I didn't stop until I reached the main road 2 miles later. I flagged down the first car that drove by a fisherman heading to the lake before sunrise. He asked what happened, but I could barely get the words out. When I returned 2 days later with a friend to retrieve my gear, the tent was gone, and the footprints in the clearing had doubled. Some people think the woods are peaceful because they're quiet. They don't understand that silence is only peaceful when something alive is making it. But when the forest is quiet because something is watching, that's when you're prey. The bare footprints, the tapping on the tent, the figure absorbing light, those details point to something that wasn't just human curiosity. It was territorial. It was testing the storyteller's reactions, circling, pushing, waiting. And the missing tent? That wasn't theft. That was a warning. Something out there wanted him to know. You walked into its clearing, not the other way around. If you've made it this far, you already feel it. That tightness in the chest, that awareness of your surroundings, that instinctive urge to double-check the locks before you sleep. That's what real outdoor horror does. Not monsters, not legends, but encounters. The kind you don't see coming, and the kind you never fully understand. Tonight you heard 3 true camping horror stories from people who went into the woods expecting peace and came back changed. If you want more true forest encounters, camping horror stories, and real wilderness mysteries, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Comment which story hit you the hardest. And if you want to support the channel, share this video with someone who loves the outdoors, like it helps more than you realize. And remember, out there, beyond the trail markers and the campfire glow, the woods are never empty. I'm Morrigan. Sleep lightly, and I'll see you in the next one.